AI has predicted 8 events that could trigger World War III and kill millions of people. Today, we're going to tell you what they are and how you can prepare for them. Now, is World War III coming? The reality is, the world has been relatively peaceful for many decades. It's quite possible. But even if it's not, to me, ideas like this should be a stand-in for something bad is going to happen somewhere. We've seen pandemics. We've seen governments spying on people. We've seen governments confiscating their citizens' money and just raising their taxes. Bad things happen around the world. Let's look at these events as a way to prepare for how these 8 things could impact us, whether World War III or not. We're going to go through 8 scenarios. We're going to comment on each. You know my overall take. Have a second residence permit is a place that you can go. That may or may not be the same place as a second citizenship that you hold that gives you an alternate travel document. Hopefully one that if you're from the US or the UK or some big country that people have opinions about, is a country people don't think that much about. You want to be from a country that, St. Lucia or, Ecuador, that people don't really have any aspersions of. And someone recently told me, well, if you were stuck in Ukraine, for example, this is their comment, you wouldn't have been able to get out. And I say, well, there was talk of stuff happening for weeks. But more importantly, if you think some of these things are going to happen, don't wait until they happen to start making your move. Get a residence permit, get a passport, have some cash somewhere else, whether it's a bank account, gold in a vault, a Bitcoin ledger in a safe deposit box, whatever it is that you want to put somewhere else. Get all your infrastructure in place now, even if you're not moving a lot of money, even if you're not spending much of any time in that residence permit country, get it set up now. Citizenship, my investment programs are taking a little bit longer now due to a few new boxes that need to be ticked. So don't wait. Let's talk about the 8 things. This is from The Sun, and basically they went through and asked ChatGPT, what could start World War III? Whether you like ChatGPT or not, here's what it said. Number 1 is territorial disputes. You're seeing more of these. You have the big ones. You have Ukraine, Russia. You have Gaza, Israel. You obviously have, from Serbia and all kinds of places around the world. You see now Venezuela initiating one. So territorial disputes are an issue. And so what the ChatGPT says is that over the years, these territorial disputes have become more and more complex. But the fight over land, both sides claim, has grown increasingly bloody. And so there's talk of what one event, we've seen this in past wars, what one event triggers other allies of the country, being targeted to get involved, and then the allies of the other side get involved, and it becomes a sort of regional, if not world war. So territorial disputes, you hear about a lot of those in the news. That's one. The number 2 thing it said was nationalism and populism. Now I'm sure, listen, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you what ChatGPT said. The rise of nationalist and populist leaders promoting aggressive foreign policies might contribute to increased tensions. So one of the things that's talked about is, would the U.S. ever pull out of NATO? Seems highly unlikely. And you know what? Maybe some countries that don't pay much for their defense should not be defended for free. You can make that point as well. But whatever you think or I think doesn't mean other people are going to agree. And so there's talk of, you have this relative peace and prosperity in recent decades because you have a lot of countries that are getting along. And people would say it's NATO and the European Union and all those things that's done that. Now, we think that all the regulations and all the defense spending that's pushed economies into deficit and highly into debt, like all those things have, in some cases, created less financial freedom and less personal freedom for citizens of Western countries, which is why exactly a number of you are here saying, yeah, I'd like to have another place to live where it's more affordable, where the taxes are lower, where the government's peaceful, where I can just live my life, the people are nicer. I think that's a good thing regardless. If you live in a country where the culture is, let's run up tons of debt, who cares, your kids will pay for it later. You, the rich fat cat, should pay more because all of our cronies, got money to go out and build bombs. I just don't know why would you want to wait? Why would you want to live in that country and wait for something to happen? So now the counterbalance to that is this kind of nationalism, populism, let's kind of be more isolated. And they're saying, well, that's going to disrupt the order. Wouldn't it be nice to live in and be a citizen of a place where you didn't have to wonder which way the pendulum was swinging on this stuff? Some of the countries we talk about, I just think it doesn't really matter what's happening in the rest of the world. You go to Mauritius, Are you really worried what the US and NATO and Russia and China are doing? It will have some effects on everything, but I kind of think in Mauritius or Argentina or Vanuatu, or maybe even places a bit further north, like it's just not an issue. Failed diplomacy. Number 3, diplomatic efforts to resolve international conflicts could erode trust. So failures in diplomatic efforts could erode trust between nations, create hostile environments. You do seem to have, not only in a country like the US, more people at each other's throats, you seem to have more countries at each other's throats these days than it seems like 20 years ago. What does that turn into? The technological arms race is number 4, a race for advanced military tech, such as AI, autonomous weapons, or advanced weaponry could lead to another arms race. I never understood this, by the way. I never understood why other countries shouldn't be allowed to have certain weapons. I mean, for me, coming from the US, I always felt like you guys have the only right perspective. It's not what's good for the goose, good for the gander. I think one of the themes that we talk about here, though, is you're seeing countries that would have been very much pushed down due to sanctions or just their own economic malaise 30 years ago, that now have become regional players that have now developed their economies. They're not as big as the US, and people in the US and Western countries might still laugh at them and say, oh, what are we worried about, this country over there? Turkey's an example. It's become more of a big player. They've developed kind of a regional manufacturing, and just there's more stuff happening in Turkey. And Turkey is, I think, enjoying its position between everything that's going on with Russia and Ukraine. They've been kind of a player in that. Now with what's happening in Israel and Gaza, they've been a player in that. And so I think that you're going to see more countries like that have some kind of seat at the table. And it's not going to be a dictate. And so those countries are going to have a bigger voice. Is that going to lead to some kind of squabbles, failed diplomacy, technological arms race? There's more places to get weapons from. I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just saying this is the reality. And I think that far too many people who just live in one country, you just want to watch the news in that country and say, oh, that's a great narrative. My opinion's always right. Well, that's great, but things are happening whether we like it or not. And I think there's a lot of countries that are stepping up to take a bigger seat at the table, and they may not agree with your country. Number 5, proxy wars, ongoing regional conflicts where major powers are working as sponsors could escalate into broader wars. You have a number of those going on. Resource scarcity, number 6. Here's a big one. Intense competition for essential resources such as water, oil, or rare minerals could also be very dangerous. I think it's important to have a presence in a place where you can sustain yourself. I am not a big prepper, but you know what? I do think you should take common sense measures to have some food around. I think having some agricultural land is not only a good investment. I got my agricultural land in Georgia assessed recently. Obviously, land is difficult to sell, prices vary widely, but on paper, it's up almost 50-fold from what I bought it a number of years ago. So I think it's an opportunity to park some cash in a foreign country that allows you to buy agricultural land. Perhaps it's a place where you could get to on a commercial or private plane if you had to. I think having access to resources is valuable. And I think for a lot of people who live in North America, being in Central or South America, having a residence permit and maybe buying a house with some land or just some land isn't the worst thing you could do. There's places maybe in Far Eastern Europe that could be interesting for you that you could get to. Do I think that's highly likely? No, but I'm a person, I like to cover every possible thing that could happen. And so resource scarcity is one. I think having citizenship, or at least a residence permit in a country with lots of water, this may not be the top priority for people, but if you really want to cover all your bases, water is going to become a more scarce resource. And if you look at water per capita, I think the highest level of fresh water per capita is actually in Colombia. Colombia has a residence program, and there's opportunities there, I think. Obviously, if you live in Canada, Canada has lots of fresh water. So that could also work. But Canada also has some problems. Economic turmoil, number 7. I think you're going to see more of this in the Western world. And that doesn't mean that the Western world's going to collapse. I'm not one of these guys, the dollar is going to go down 99% tomorrow. But it has been going down, obviously, for 100 years, a little bit every year. The U.S. stake of world reserve currency goes down a little bit every year. It doesn't all go to one player. It goes to multiple different players. This multipolarity we keep talking about is going to have a role, potentially. I'm not a geopolitical strategist, but you would think maybe it has some role in future conflicts. But economic turmoil in the West is increasing. It's just not as easy to get ahead. Why? Because I think in part because some of these other countries have a seat at the table. You're building middle classes in Asia. Now they're building middle classes in Africa. You're getting people to that $5,000 and $10,000 a year level that puts them in the middle class in a number of African countries, places like Kenya, where they're building the Silicon Sahara, I believe they call it, where there's a lot of, startup activity going on there. You don't hear about it. You might think, hey, that's cute, who cares? But it's developing them and that region, for example, into having a bigger seat at the table. And again, if they don't agree with your country, that's going to present, alternatives to the dollar eventually, alternatives in geopolitical issues. And so you're seeing the wealth of the world is shifting back towards the east. It went west for quite a while. Now it's shifting back east and in some cases south. And lastly, number 8, they mentioned cyber warfare. I'll tell you this, if there's cyber warfare, I think they're probably going to come after the big countries first, and they're going to leave the Antiguans. They're going to leave that one for later. Like taking down the Malaysian grid is going to be like lower on their list than like, hey, New York City. And so those are the 8 things that ChatGPT, according to The Sun, says will potentially cause World War III. I just think, and I felt this my entire life, I've been, libertarian leaning since I was 14 or 15 years old. I increasingly see the danger of being associated with big behemoth countries. I'm not telling you to give up your passport. I'm not telling you even have to leave your country, but I'm telling you to have options. That when you see countries around the world increasingly forming blocs and saying, hey, the US screwed us on this. Oh, they sanctioned our allies or they sanctioned us. Yeah, hey, we're going to sanction them. And all of our investors who increasingly have money can't invest in the US. Or, who knows what could happen. Or, hey, their businesses can't expand here. I think one of the best ways to play this, if you have a business, figure out how you can be doing business in some of these emerging economies. I mean, if you look at Nomad Capitalist, our business, when we started helping people with actual services, it was almost entirely Western. US, Canada, Australia, UK, then, we get some German stuff like that, but that was primarily the mix. And over the years, it's become very well diversified. Still a lot of Westerners, love our Westerners, but people from Brazil, people from Vietnam, people from, all points in between, very wealthy. Some of the wealthiest people actually are from those places because they believe in this stuff. Because they're like, yeah, I've seen, my family has seen crazy stuff happening in our country with pandemics and government spying. And of course, obviously all the calls for higher taxes. I think Westerners are seeing it now too. But the point is, you have to be prepared for a world in which stuff is going to change. And I just think that being tied to the big brand name countries is going to be a disadvantage. So at least give yourself the option. If you want to be American, great. Go out and get, Turkey as a citizenship buy investment program. If you're looking for a place to buy real estate, you're probably a little bit late, but there's still some deals in Turkey. Maybe not Istanbul anymore. Maybe you go down to Izmir if you want more growth, or you go to Istanbul if you want more stability in dollar terms. That's if you buy it the way I would. So you want to start setting up places around the world, 5 Caribbean countries. You can get citizenship by investment. There's a few more boxes to tick now than there were a year ago because the process becomes increasingly different thanks to the big countries saying, wait a second, there's actually some competition. Like, thanks to people like this Nomad Capitalist guy, more and more Americans are going down and getting second citizenship. More and more Americans are getting Portugal golden visas, and they're working towards Portugal citizenship. Even though it's slow, at least things are looking in the right direction there right now. I'm not saying don't have citizenship in a Western country. I think you want to protect against that because I think that the world is changing. And I think that Western countries, especially the big ones, are going to lash out. They're going to lash out with higher taxes. They're going to lash out with this cultural issues where you might have, more internal conflicts in countries. They're going to lash out militarily. They're not going to go down without a fight. And so when I hear our Bitcoin clients saying, well, not our Bitcoin clients, but our Bitcoin leads who don't become clients saying like, yeah, like, I'm just not going to pay taxes on my Bitcoin. Why do I need you? Like, I'm just not going to pay. Like, do you really think that the IRS or the HMRC or the ATM with their billions they're spending on AI programs to like figure out when you got your crypto? Like, do you think they're never going to find you? Like just sitting in the middle of their own country? Eventually they are. Like, I'd rather sleep well at night. And so just all these things together, I think they're going to come after with people with wealth as there's less economic power. I'm not saying the economic power of these countries goes to zero. It just goes down by the margins, and the margins are what matters. And it's going to all these other countries over here. And I think that plays somewhat into a potential, whether it's World War III or some other thing like that, that you should be prepared for. So, being St. Lucian isn't the worst thing in the world if this kind of stuff happens, whether it's cyber, whether it's war. And if you can get in a plane and go somewhere where you've got a residence permit that's far away from the fur flying, that would be a good thing, not a bad thing. If you want us to help you put that whole portfolio together of banks, residence passports, and potentially tax savings, you go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply.